𝗃𝗂𝗃𝗀𝗃.
Cool!
Hey everyone, it's 𝗃𝗂𝗀𝗶𝗁, and today I'm here with a more casual video again. This is going to be very similar to my last video where I kind of just went over some certain points in regards to a certain topic, and it was mostly non-scripted. The reason why I'm doing this is because I'm currently going through a moving process, so things have been pretty busy and chaotic over here, over at my place, so I can't exactly do video essays and my usual scripted content so easily right now, so I figured why not just put out an unscripted video. I apologize for the topics being all over the place. I know I promised that I would put out that big Mario project, and I had a Sonic project on the back burner and all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of videos I need to get to eventually, but because I'm moving and I'm very busy right now, I can't get to that stuff. So I figured I'd just put out this unscripted video first. But enough update stuff. I'll update you guys on the community tab of my channel and on other social media if I really need to get some important update to you guys. For now, let's dive into the main topic of today's video. And the topic of today's video is going to be covering my current outlook of Nintendo. Now, the basis for this video is the fact that Nintendo seems to be very divisive lately. I mean, it's felt like for a while now, Nintendo has always had this divisive air to them. There's people who absolutely love everything they do. They see them as this company that can do no wrong and just praise them to the high heavens. And then there are people who think Nintendo is easily one of the worst companies. They would even go toe-to-toe with dudes like EA and Konami right now, which I find laughable. But, you know, it's a genuine discussion out there. So I wanted to give my input on where I stand with Nintendo, because I feel like it's been a while since I really made a video just giving my raw impressions on Nintendo and things I like about them, things I don't like about them, and everything in between. So again, what inspired this is all of the recent Nintendo controversies and topics and stuff like that. I originally planned to make like a Nintendo Fear of the Future video, which was going to be very similar to my Sonic Fear of the Future video. But I feel like this isn't necessarily a full-on rant video like that video was. Like, the whole point of Sonic Fear of the Future was genuine concern for the future of Sonic and how I was not happy with a lot of where Sonic's direction was going. With Nintendo, I'm not necessarily in that state. While there's a lot of areas about them that I'm genuinely concerned about, I don't think they're nearly as on much of a dark road as Sonic is, in my opinion. Of course, when I say that though, people assume that I'm like some big Nintendo fanboy, that I like Nintendo a lot more over Sonic, and let me get this off my chest right now. Again, I love Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic is the theme of this freaking channel. If I didn't like Sonic more than series like Mario and Kirby, do you think I would be called 𝗃𝗂𝗃𝗃𝗃? Like, it just annoys me whenever I make one of these videos and people claim, oh, you're a Nintendo hater. All you do is criticize Nintendo and everything they do. You're so annoying. Like, why do you hate Nintendo? Even though I put out countless videos praising things about Nintendo. And then on the opposite end, you have people who call me a Nintendo fanboy, claim I make excuses for them despite, oh, I don't know, the number of Nintendo rant videos I've put on this channel. Like, that's something I want to get off my chest right now. I'm not a Nintendo hater. I'm not a Nintendo fanboy. I am just a guy who likes Nintendo, and I see them as this cool company who does a lot right, but they also do a lot wrong. At the end of the day, they are a billion-dollar corporation. While they do things that I think genuinely make them better than other companies, they do make a lot of stupid mistakes because, well, they're a corporation. They're not going to care about the average fan who buys their products. There are times where they're very anti-consumer. And yes, I say anti-consumer now. I know in that one previous video I was really iffy on the definition of that, but yes, I know what anti-consumer means. I apologize for my mixing up of that definition in some other videos, but let's just focus on the main topic now, which is my current thoughts of Nintendo, what I think is good about them, what I think is bad about them, and just really diving into my thoughts on a lot of their recent topics. So let's get into it. So the first topic I want to get into is a topic I'm going to nickname Nintendo Then versus Nintendo Now. And by Nintendo Then, I mean comparisons between the last generation of Nintendo and this current generation of Nintendo. Now, with this generation, the Switch era, going on as long as it has for a while now, obviously there's going to be a lot of comparisons to the Wii U and 3DS era, because we're now, I think, four, wow. Man, I still remember year one of the Switch like it was yesterday. It's crazy to think that we're almost 4 years into the life of this system. It is just insane. But yeah, there are a lot of comparisons between the last generation and this current generation. And many people argue that in the last generation, Nintendo was far better than they are right now, and that Nintendo right now is just not good and not on the same heights as they were as in the last generation. Now, what are my thoughts on this? My thoughts on this are very mixed, because I feel like there are a lot of people who don't remember how low the Nintendo era last generation really was. Like, there were some real low points during the Wii U and 3DS era. Like, the Wii U and 3DS era started a lot of problems that carried into this generation. So to say that the last generation was problem-free, I don't know about that. But there are a lot of things, though, that the Wii U and 3DS era did do a lot better than the Switch era. So let's talk about some of those things. So I guess the overall thing that a lot of people bring up is leadership and compassion. Was Nintendo more compassionate and better directed now or back then? Now, one of the reasons that this is brought up is that right now, the leadership of the Switch era is very rocky. Like, ever since we lost Nintendo's president, Satoru Iwata, which, God bless his soul, I really miss that man. Like, it feels like Nintendo has just lost a piece of their soul. Like, I will agree with a lot of people that ever since these new presidents have taken over, Nintendo just does not feel the same. Like, when Iwata and Reggie were at the forefront of the company, Nintendo just felt a lot more lively. They had this unique charm about them that made them such a comfortable company to follow. Iwata was very quirky. He always appeared in directs himself to present games to you. He made so many great decisions, like, despite the bad decisions that he occasionally made that I disagreed with, because in case you didn't know, there were bad decisions made by Iwata and Reggie while they were in charge of Nintendo. I've actually made videos on this channel talking about some of those decisions and quotes by them. But there is so much good that they've done that you can't just speak ill of them. Like, keep in mind, I don't have any disrespect for Iwata or Reggie. I think that they are Nintendo at its core. Like, they were such a huge part of Nintendo. They made so many great decisions. Like, remember when Iwata took a cut of his own paycheck just so that his own employees wouldn't get fired? That man is just so, like, that man, we didn't deserve him. He was such a good person. And then you compare that to who's running Nintendo right now, which it seems like a lot of people don't even know who's running Nintendo right now. The main person that people talk about is Doug Bowser, who currently runs Nintendo of America. And Doug Bowser is very iffy. Like, I feel like we can't necessarily get a read on the guy. Like, he seemed very promising at first when he came out during E3, I want to say 2019, I think it was 2019. When he came out during E3 2019 and presented that Nintendo Direct, he seemed very confident in the role. He truly felt like someone who could potentially live up to the legacy that Reggie left behind. But ever since then, it feels like he's kind of just disappeared. Like, he came out, he made the funny Bowser joke, and then he kind of just peaced out. We haven't heard much from him since then. He just does not compare to the absolute raw excitement and hype that Reggie as a president brought. Like, we don't even see Doug Bowser that much. And when you look on the Japanese side of things, you know, the actual core Nintendo, the current Nintendo president right now, he is just like non-existent. Like, I think his name is Furukawa or something. I might be butchering that, but I'm gonna put his name on screen. Basically, he's the current president of Nintendo, and he just feels like a non-existent hollow shell of a president. We rarely hear anything about him. He does not appear in Nintendo Directs like Iwata did. He doesn't really say anything that makes Nintendo's future seem promising. And if anything, it feels like when he took the mantle, a lot of bad decisions were made. Like, a lot of people praise Kimishima because when he took over, it felt like he really was carrying on Iwata's legacy somewhat. The first year of the Switch was absolutely amazing, and I will never agree with people that Switch from the jump has been this downfall of Nintendo, because the first year of the Switch proved that Nintendo could carry on as a company despite losing major figures like Reggie and Iwata. But for a while now, recently, it's just felt like Nintendo is really missing something. Like, ever since Kimishima stepped down and this new guy took over, he just does not feel like a good president at all. Again, we rarely hear about him much. He doesn't seem that into games as much as Iwata, Reggie, and even like Doug Bowser. Like, even Doug Bowser, he somewhat cares about games. He makes funny references to games occasionally, but I don't know, this guy, Furukawa, I'm very mixed on him. Now, a lot of people pretty much paint the current Nintendo president as the devil, basically, because they feel like a lot of the bad modern decisions with Nintendo are coming straight from him. And I don't know, I want to say that a lot of it is his fault, but I also feel like a lot of the problems with modern Nintendo are problems that built on from the last generation and have not been checked. I don't want to 100% put the blame on the current president as much as some other people have, but I will say that as a leader of Nintendo, he still is pretty weak because he just has no type of presence or energy like Iwata did, like other Nintendo figures such as Sakurai, Reggie, Miyamoto, all that stuff. So in terms of leadership, it's a very shaky position right now. Like, in terms of like personality, Nintendo definitely lost a lot of it when they lost those major figures. But in terms of like overall, I think Nintendo is manageable, but you can definitely tell they've lost a lot of that charm. And that's something I really hope Nintendo improves on in the future, because right now Nintendo just feels very dry and soulless when it comes to their presentation, when it comes to their energy. They've improved in areas for sure overall, I think, and I think a lot of people discount that. But in terms of the leadership and their raw presentation and their, I'm gonna say, swagger, it's just not there. They don't have the same amount of hype as dudes like Iwata and Reggie did. Next, let's talk about a category I'm gonna label as classic Nintendo problems. These are problems that are talked about a lot lately that people say are modern Nintendo problems that I more so see as problems that they've had for a while now, but have just escalated to the point that they are at right now. So first, let's talk about Nintendo's poor handling of retro games. Now, this is something that they've always been very shaky on. I feel like Nintendo, while they've done great things in preserving their retro games, such as the original virtual consoles, like the virtual console on the Wii, on the Wii U, on the 3DS, absolutely amazing because they had a lot of their legacy content on there, but there were a lot of flaws with how that legacy content was on there. They mostly re-released a lot of the same popular games like Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers 3, Super Mario 64, like a lot of their, popular games that everyone and their mom have played. They didn't really dive deep into their back catalog of IPs or games, and I feel like that's one reason why they've always had a problem with retro games. But with Switch, it has just escalated horribly because the Switch virtual console, if you want to call it that, is pathetic. As you know, originally the first year of Switch Online was free. It was basically just like the Wii U and 3DS's online, where you just play online, and it was peer-to-peer. But ever since they've started charging for it, I've absolutely hated Nintendo Online because it feels like it hasn't changed at all. We're paying $20 a year for an online service that basically does not much more different than the online service on the previous generation systems. And I see that as one of the biggest issues of modern Nintendo. I absolutely hate the fact that they started charging for online, but there's really nothing there to justify it. Now, what could have justified it a bit were the retro games that they include in the online service. Originally, we had NES games, and I was like, okay, well, NES games are tiring, and they're not even that great games at this point. Like, there are a lot of NES games that haven't really aged as well as other games, like games on GameCube, games on N64. So we're definitely a little tired of NES games, but if they build up to those later systems, fine, we can deal with it. Unfortunately, that was not the case, because we have been getting NES and SNES updates for so long now. Like, by now, it feels like they would bring out like N64, Game Boy Advance, something other than NES and SNES, but no, they've basically been like drip feeding us games from NES and SNES. Like, for example, they had an update the other day where they hit us with this random game called Jelly Boy. Who on earth remembers or cares about Jelly Boy? Like, where on earth is Earthbound? Earthbound is one of the biggest SNES games, and it's one of the best games Nintendo has ever made, yet why on earth isn't that on the service? I saw a lot of people saying, oh, why are you asking for Earthbound and Super Mario RPG? They obviously have copyright issues with those games, so they don't need them on the service. Well, if they're going to drip feed us NES and SNES games, I feel like at bare minimum, they should have the best NES games and SNES games. You know, with NES, yeah, I think they do have some of the best for sure. They have like Kirby's Adventure and all the Mario games and stuff like that. They pretty much have that covered. So I get it. If they want to drip feed us NES games, I can understand why there isn't much more to drip feed there. But with SNES, there are so many more games they could at least put on the system that could make it a little more worthwhile. But at the end of the day, I'm just tired of NES and SNES games. It is absolutely ridiculous to me that by now we don't have like N64 or at least like OG Game Boy or Game Boy Advance. The 3DS had Game Boy Advance games. Like, remember the Ambassador program for people who bought the 3DS on day one? They practically gave you free Game Boy Advance games. And a lot of those Game Boy Advance games were absolute bangers. Metroid Fusion, Mario vs. Donkey Kong, Wario Land 4, so many good games they just gave to you for free. But yet on this service, we gotta wait for ages just to get some of the best SNES games. It's such a drag. And Nintendo's handling of online and retro games are easily one of the biggest problems with the company, in my opinion. I practically rant about it all the time on Twitter and other social media, and it's just one thing I undeniably think Nintendo has dropped the ball on, and they need to get it together when it comes to that. Now, what solution could they do? Obviously, either bring back the original Virtual Console and just keep building on those games and giving us actual games that we haven't played in ages, or like revamp it and do it into this cool Netflix service where you get a lot of Nintendo's legacy backlog, but charge more for it. Like, honestly, at this point, I will pay like, what, $60 a year just to get, you know, actual proper legacy support. Get those GameCube games, get those N64 games. And I know the Switch has limitations, like GameCube games have bigger sizes, so I can understand that they wouldn't give us a whole catalog of GameCube games for free, like for $20 a year. I can understand that, but I'm so tired of the current model, and I think it's easily one of Nintendo's biggest modern problems. And while I do think it's something that originated from the last generation, it has just escalated horribly, and that's all I have to say there. Before we end this section off though, there's a few more other classic Nintendo problems I want to get into. So the next classic Nintendo problem I want to touch on is a lack of new games. Now, this is a problem that is kind of directly from the last generation. As we know, Nintendo kind of got on the HD train a bit late, and because of that, they weren't used to developing HD games, and that led to a huge game droughts back on the Wii U, and it was absolutely ridiculous. The 3DS got much more because the 3DS was a less powerful system, and so it seems like that problem has kind of carried over to the Switch. While the Switch is definitely a handheld and it doesn't require, all the time having these big budget HD games, because it's capable of doing big budget HD games like Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, that's mostly what people expect. And that kind of has led to this drought kind of problem where we have a lack of brand new Nintendo games. Now, we definitely do get a lot of new Nintendo games still. As a matter of fact, E3 2021 was a perfect example of how Nintendo is still capable of giving us brand new Switch experiences. And I know I never got out my review or a review podcast for that E3, but basically all you need to know is I think that E3 is a perfect example of how Nintendo is definitely still capable of putting out new games. However, while this isn't a classic Nintendo problem, I might as well bring it up here. They also have a problem of relying on ports, and this is a modern Nintendo problem. While they have relied on ports in the past, like for example, the GBA relied heavily on ports, and that's mostly because they were focused on putting games from the consoles onto the handheld to really spice up that appeal. But with the Switch, it feels like they really got carried away with ports to the point where we are paying $60 just for straight ports of games. And I think that's the point where ports become a problem. When we are paying $60 for games that were clearly much less than $60 originally, that's where ports become a problem. And my stance on ports has been all over the place. Sometimes I think ports are okay. I don't think they're as big of a deal as people make it out. But other times I think ports are not good. For example, I think Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is an example of a good port. While it's a straight port of the game from the Wii U and it's a bit of a the people who already bought it on the Wii U, there are new things to entice you to buy it. For example, they added a whole new battle mode. They added new characters. They added new maps and stuff. Not new race maps, but you get what I mean. It had new content in there. So I think that was a port that was justifiable somewhat. But then you have a port like The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD, which is a Wii game that is just, kind of upscaled slightly and only has so many new features to justify it being $60. And it's especially bitter when you consider the original Skyward Sword game was $40. Well, I'm not sure on that, but the fact that Nintendo will go out their way to charge $60 for any type of game that breathes is just ridiculous. And that gets into another modern Nintendo problem that, I really dislike and I think is a major issue, which is overpricing. And we're going to talk more about overpricing in a second, but basically, I think the lack of new games problem, while I do think there is genuine reason to be concerned for the future of Nintendo's game output, I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be. The next classic Nintendo problem I'm going to get into is Nintendo stubbornness. What do I mean by this? Well, obviously Nintendo as a company is different from others. There are times where they will really put their foot down and protect their IP to the point where they will not let a lot of things change with some of their games. And in some cases, that's really good because it prevents stupid developers from coming in and bringing in stupid ideas. However, there are times where they go way too far to the point where they make their games extremely vanilla and basic and very forgettable because of how samey they feel. An example, the current state of Mario RPGs. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into this because I have a whole separate video I need to do on that. But basically, Nintendo's stubbornness has basically prevented the Mario RPGs from being good in a while. The current state of Mario RPGs is just painful. And with Mario in general, there are some Mario games in the Switch era that are a breath of fresh air and feel like great Mario games that really push the series forward. But then there are other Mario games that kind of feel very samey. You can tell they're playing it safe because Nintendo is being very stubborn. And that, I feel, is something Nintendo needs to work on. It's a classic Nintendo problem that has barely been solved. And I honestly don't know if this problem will be solved anytime soon. This is one of the problems I think is more so in the core of Nintendo than due to the fault of one specific person. For example, people are like, oh, it's 𝗕𝗂𝗀𝗋𝗀's fault. It's his fault that the Mario RPGs are bad right now. Not necessarily. I think there's higher ups at Nintendo that are just really stubborn and are the reason why Nintendo just makes these really head-ass decisions sometimes. And that's the reason why Nintendo's stubbornness is still a problem that persists, and I'm not sure if it's a problem that's going to be solved anytime soon. So that's an area I'm more so mixed on. But yeah, that's gonna have to do it with classic Nintendo problems. So now we can move on to the next category. Alright, so next we're going to talk about some modern Nintendo problems. These are some problems that I think definitely did arise during the Switch era, and I think it really adds to the fact that Nintendo has kind of declined a bit from how they were in the last generation. So let's talk a bit about these modern Nintendo problems. And the first one I really want to get into off the back is Joy-Con drift. You've heard all sorts of Switch owners talk about it. Nintendo Switch controllers, the Joy-Cons, will occasionally drift after extensive use, and it is absolutely ridiculous. Like, the first time I really noticed it was when playing Super Mario Odyssey. There was a certain level I couldn't beat, and I was thinking, what? How have I not beaten this level yet? And it turns out it was due to Joy-Con drift. This is without a doubt one of the worst modern Nintendo problems, because this is just some little thing that you can ignore. It's not some annoying thing that is not a big deal. No, this is affecting the gameplay of games. This is affecting the quality of Nintendo console products. It's something that Nintendo should address and should have fixed by now, but they just keep pretending like it's not an issue. As a matter of fact, that ties into the next topic that we're going to talk about, which is the new model of the Nintendo Switch, the Nintendo Switch OLED. Now, this new Nintendo Switch model basically set social media on fire, because if you remember, leading up to E3 this year, there was a lot of speculation about a Nintendo Switch Pro, which was going to be this new Nintendo Switch system that has more power, new features, and all of that stuff. Well, the Switch OLED, while it has a couple of new features that honestly should have been there since the start, other than that, it really doesn't have much new to it, you know? It's even using the same doggone Joy-Cons, which is just inexcusable to me. Nintendo by now should have issued, callbacks to those Joy-Cons and come out with some sort of new model that improves on the issue. But instead of doing that, they're basically selling you faulty products. And I think this is by far some of the most scummiest stuff that Nintendo has done in recent memory. And I think it's a major issue they need to address in the future. Now, I think naturally this might be something that gets addressed with maybe a Nintendo Switch 2 or a Nintendo Switch Pro. Maybe eventually they will fix the Joy-Cons and give us proper controllers. But the fact that they just haven't done anything right now is just really concerning. And that is the reason why I just feel like I understand why people see Nintendo has declined in recent memory. Speaking of the Nintendo Switch OLED, that leads into another thing I want to talk about, which is lack of competition. Some people believe that the current lack of competition for Nintendo has kind of led to them getting a bit too big for their britches, Right now, they're pretty much dominating the entire handheld market. There are no other handhelds. Sony pretty much gave up after the Vita. Xbox really isn't doing anything. They're just focusing on their console stuff as per usual. And it seemed like for a while there was no competition to the Switch, and it's still selling really well. So some people think lack of competition is a major factor to some of Nintendo's modern problems. And I would have to kind of agree. I feel like Nintendo is really at their best when they're really pushed to their limits sometimes. Like during the Wii U era, they were really pushed to their limits, and that led to them pushing out some fire games. Yes, the Wii U and 3DS era had some really dark moments. Really dark moments. But they did put out some fire games during that generation. So the lack of competition and the lack of rush for Nintendo to do better, I feel like it is affecting their mindset a bit. However, that's recently changed because recently, believe it or not, Valve of all people has announced a competitor to the Switch with the Steam Deck, which is basically this portable PC thing that can play Steam games. And a lot of people see this as the Nintendo Switch killer, and it's going to be the system that makes the Switch irrelevant. At the end of the day, you can't just make a Nintendo system entirely irrelevant because Nintendo will always have their unique IPs, they will always have their unique branding. So I don't think this system is going to blow Nintendo out of the water. And personally, I don't care for it too much because if I want to play PC games, I'm just going to play them on my PC. I don't really care that much for playing games on the go with Steam. You know, a lot of those games are built for the PC. They're not built for the system, for the Steam Deck. So that's kind of what really gives the Switch a major advantage. However, I could see this system maybe lighting a bit of a fire under Nintendo because they are touting a lot of interesting benefits, such as the fact that they will have controllers that don't drift. So, yikes, that's definitely a big hit against Nintendo because right now, Joy-Con drift is easily one of the biggest problems with the Nintendo Switch. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting thing that we're just gonna have to wait and see what happens with that. Will the Steam Deck actually be a legit threat to Nintendo and their future in the handheld market? Or will this basically just be another Ouya and just fade into obscurity? We don't know, it's too early to tell. Alright, and we are now going to touch on the final major modern Nintendo problem that I think is relevant to today's video, and that is the quote-unquote finish it later controversy. So recently, there's been a lot of talk that some of Nintendo's recent products are not games that are finished. And this is a pretty big deal because Nintendo having big, polished, finished games is kind of their whole thing. That's the main reason why a lot of people saw them as one of the best video game companies. So to imagine that we get Nintendo games that lack content at launch and need to be updated later, like other third-party games, is just really concerning. So what are my thoughts on this? I think it's definitely an issue that needs to be solved. There are a lot of games where they have solid cores. Like the Switch era overall has had some fire games. They are games that are really great on the Switch. However, some of the games that are most criticized are the games with this finish it later approach. For example, Animal Crossing New Horizons. New Horizons was pretty much one of the most anticipated Nintendo Switch games because Animal Crossing fans were going crazy for a new Animal Crossing game. However, when they actually got New Horizons, they realized that it lacked certain features from some of the previous installments, and this led to a lot of people being turned off with the game and even straight up hating it. So it's clear that this finish it later controversy is so bad to the point where it will turn fans off from like straight up mainline games. And I think it's definitely something Nintendo needs to solve. Now, I'm very iffy on the finish it later controversy. Like, as long as a game, launches with a substantial amount of content, if they want to update it and add stuff later, that's fine, I feel like in the Wii U generation, that's really when they had the best grip on DLC in future updates, because Nintendo would give you these full games like Mario Kart 8 and New Super Mario Bros. U, but they would add on to that with DLC and free updates, which I think is cool. However, it's not cool to straight up launch games that lack basic features in like main campaigns. That's where I really draw the line with it. Now, there are a lot of games that are often brought up with this controversy. You have Mario Tennis Aces, you have a game like Mario Golf Super Rush, which is probably the most recent one and the one that really launched this topic into like the flames. Like that's a big talking point with that game. I honestly can't speak much about these games because I haven't bought them. I'm not a big Mario sports guy. I'm more into like games like Strikers and Mario Basketball. So the fact that these are some of the first few Mario sports games on Switch, I just didn't care for them. But I hear what these people are saying about these games. And of course, Another game that constantly gets brought up with this is Kirby Star Allies, but let me just say right now, I'm not going to be saying much on Kirby Star Allies because I have a whole video that's going to be talking a lot about Kirby Star Allies and some other modern Kirby games. Believe me, I have a lot to say about that. It's not necessarily going to be excusing the finish it later approach, because I know that there are aspects of that are a genuine issue within Star Allies. Like, as much as I think Star Allies is not as bad as people say it is, I do agree with the sentiment that the finish it later approach definitely hurt that game immensely there. Like, there are aspects of it that really hurt that game, but I also want to make a video discussing why it's not as bad as people may think, but we're gonna come back to that. But yeah, that's gonna do it for modern Nintendo problems. So now we're gonna get to our final category that you probably wouldn't have expected to be the final category, but let's just get into it. Alright, so the final category we're going to talk about is Super Smash Bros. Discourse. You would think this would be kind of stupid because, really, Nux, you say the final category, you're going to talk about freaking Smash Bros. As if you don't talk about Smash all the time on this channel. Trust me, I know. I talk a lot about Smash and I really love these games to death. So you can probably guess what my stance is going to be on a lot of the Super Smash Bros. Discourse. A lot of people claim Smash is a game series that's declined immensely because Sakurai has made terrible decisions. There are certain decisions he's made with Ultimate that really hurt the game and make it not as exciting as games like Brawl and even Smash 4. To that I say, I personally think a lot of Smash Bros. Discourse is so goddamn overdramatic. I cannot stress enough how much Smash Bros. Discourse is so overdramatic, to the point where even, like the major controversies such as the issues with Nintendo versus the competitive scene, I feel like some people blow elements of that out of proportion. Now, do I think it was really scummy of Nintendo to be so heavily against the competitive scene to the point where they'll shut down streams and they'll just be really against the competitive scene? Yes, I think Nintendo's stance on the competitive scene and being against people playing the game how they want, I think that's a genuine big problem, and I stand with people like the free Melee people on that. However, there are people who argue that the way that Sakurai runs Smash and the way that he has been a part of it is it's really stupid. For example, there are people who say that, oh, Sakurai put out the Sephiroth reveal around the time of the free Melee stuff to distract people, which I think is really stupid. A big example, of course, is that very big Church of Nintendo or whatever video. I'm gonna put it on screen, but it's a pretty big Nintendo critique video that's blown up in recent memory. And I think his entire endpoint on how Sakurai is just doing this horrible job running Smash and that it's as much as his fault as Nintendo's, I disagree with a lot of that. While I do think Sakurai has his own faults with running these Smash series, like there's definitely no excuse why certain series are imbalanced in Smash. There's definitely no excuse why modern Kirby representation is so terrible in Smash Ultimate. I think there are certain problems people lump onto Sakurai that are definitely overdramatic. And I know there are people who are gonna get on me and be like, oh, you're just a Sakurai fanboy. You defend everything he does, which no, Sakurai isn't perfect. I criticize him when necessary. As a matter of fact, a big example of this is the Byleth reveal. A lot of people were very critical against the Smash team because of that reveal. And I think it's really stupid for people to strawman and say that doesn't count as Nintendo fans being critical when it very clearly is, Like, I just think that's really stupid, to say the least. But, yeah, Smash Bros. Discourse. While there's genuine problems with these Smash series I think they could work on, I think a lot of the time the Smash Bros. Community is so freaking overdramatic and, like, the games are so good, man. They're so good. None of this drama is warranted, but I feel like it just comes naturally at this point because Smash is a series that has so many other different gaming series and people from other communities all around, that naturally it's gonna build up this huge toxic discourse around it. And I don't know if it's gonna get any better or worse, to be honest. Like, I am not sure what's going to happen with Smash Discourse in the future, but yeah, that's gonna have to do it for that category, because the more I talk about it, the more pained I become. Alright folks, so we are now at the conclusion. I obviously didn't touch on every major problem with Nintendo and whether or not it's this problem that I think is blown out of proportion or it's a genuine big problem that Nintendo needs to address, but in conclusion, what is my end point? How do I feel with Nintendo right now? What is my current outlook? In summary, I don't think Nintendo is doomed. Shocking, I know. Like, obviously you can tell from my social media and my videos that I still very much like Nintendo. While they have very low, and I stress this, very low points, even during the Switch era, I don't think Nintendo is this company that is in a position where I think they're doomed. They're not in a status similar to another company I'm not gonna name because I already know what the comments are gonna say, but yeah. However, despite the fact that I don't think Nintendo is in this death state, in this absolute bottom state right now, that doesn't mean things could change drastically. I think there are major issues both from past generations and from this current generations that they need to address, but I'm not sure whether or not they will. Like, there's certain issues I think they'll address in due time just naturally. For example, Joy-Con drift. I think that's obviously something they're gonna have to solve one of these days. They have so many lawsuits on their ass about that they're gonna have to get to it eventually. However, there are other things that I'm very shaky on, like, will the Mario RPGs recover from the low status that they're in right now? Will Nintendo let go of that classic stubbornness? I don't know, man, and it's really hard to tell right now. However, what I'm going to say is that people should criticize Nintendo. While I think Nintendo oftentimes gets more shit than they deserve, they do deserve to be criticized because they're a corporation. They're not your friend. They're not this buddy that you can talk to casually. No. They are a business corporation, and I do agree with a lot of videos and other people that you should treat them as such. You should criticize Nintendo when they do stupid stuff. However, I do think that there are people who just really take it too far. There are people who complain about stuff that I think doesn't need to be addressed, honestly. Like, there are people who are like, oh, the current status of Mario Kart is bad. Mario Kart 8 is a bad game. And while it's fair to say you have that opinion, to say that it's this objective issue that Nintendo needs to solve is stupid in my opinion, especially to me, because I think Mario Kart 8 is the best Mario Kart game thus far. However, with other areas such as the finish it later controversy, that's definitely something Nintendo is gonna need to address, because releasing unfinished games is just not Nintendo. That's a genuine issue I think Nintendo needs to fix. Same with their leadership. I think Nintendo needs to have a bit more personality and energy to them again. Like, no offense to Doug Bowser and the current president of Nintendo, but they don't compare to Iwata and Reggie. That's all I'm gonna say there. So yeah, my current outlook of Nintendo is that it's mostly the same, but I definitely do see cracks in the company, and I think they have issues that they need to work on. They're not as low as certain other companies on the industry right now, and their series are not in nearly as deadly positions as certain other series out there right now, but they still have to work on stuff, and I think people should be allowed to criticize them when they need to work on stuff. And that's all I have to say. Alright folks, that's gonna be it for today. What do you think about the current status of Nintendo? Do you think that the company right now is in this irredeemable position that you're not sure they're going to recover from? Do you think Nintendo is just doing as fine as ever? Or are you like me? Do you think there's some things they need to work on, but there's other things you think aren't as big of a deal as people make out? I really am interested to hear your thoughts on this because this is a topic that is, it's all over the place in terms of how people feel. And I feel like this video is going to get a lot of comments from people who think I'm a Nintendo hater, from people who think I'm a Nintendo fanboy. It's gonna be a fucking mess, but I don't care. Whatever. Just let me know down below. Be sure to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you are new to it. And follow my social media in the description, such as my Twitter, to see more of my thoughts on video games and updates on the channel. This has been 𝗃𝗂𝘀𝗶𝗰, and I'm out. Peace.